Bijay, really quick, it looks like we're having some issues with folks accessing the chat. They can only send it to you or me.
Oh, okay, let me figure that out. Let's see what's going on here. Are you all able to access the chat? To be able to chat others?
No, unfortunately, it's still just limited to you two, I think, the hosts.
Bijay, try clicking on security.
Yeah.
And then it should say allow participants to chat.
It's checked. That mark is checked.
Are you all able to see the links that we included in the chat box?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. All right. You know what I can do is, Bijay, you can go ahead and continue, and then I'll go ahead and create like a back channel chat.
Okay.
So I'll work on that. That's odd, but we have a backup.
Sorry about that, you all. Yeah, we definitely want this to be interactive and informative. So I want to share a little bit about myself. So this is what you call an identity board. And it's always a great place to start to build community and to introduce yourself and make it a little less formal space. And so I'll share with you some of the icons that we have here in this graphic on my identity board. So if you notice, the very first picture to the far left is a graphic of the United States. And there are 3 different states that have stars by them. So it's Texas, Missouri, and Georgia. And so those states are important to me because those are places in which I live. So Texas is where I was born. I was born in Houston, Texas. And my family ended up moving to St. Louis, Missouri, which is where I was raised in my formative years. And then when I decided where I wanted to go to college, I transitioned into Georgia. So I'm based here in Atlanta, Georgia, and representing the Atlanta West Ed office. The next picture to the right of that showcases me in Belgium. And so I took a picture of this because for obvious reasons. So my first name is Bijay and it starts with B-E. And so this was an abbreviation for Belgium. So I have that picture there. I took a picture there while I was traveling. And so one of the things about me that gets me going is travel. And so I definitely can't wait until I'm able to travel abroad again. Next to that picture is a school picture of myself as a 3rd grade teacher. And so I taught here in Atlanta for 10 years and taught grades roughly 2nd through 3rd grade, but also provided a variety of support from K through 12. And so that was my school picture shot there. So I wanted to showcase that because that makes me who I am and is a part of my lens is being an educator. To the far right at the top, you'll see a to-do list. So this is how my brain operates. I have tons of sticky notes everywhere, to-dos. So this is part of my project management and how I operate. So I have these checklists and to-dos everywhere. So that's another piece that makes me me. And then if we go to the cute little picture right below that, you'll see a picture of one of my toddler baby pictures. And so that was actually me in Houston, Texas. And if you look at the filter or the coloring of that photo, that may give you an idea of when that photo was taken, So I wanted to put that on there too. And I can only imagine what I was thinking at that moment. I kind of have a look of like, oh, what did I do? Or what are we about to do? Next to that, to the left of the baby picture is a picture of me facilitating a training. A lot of my time in elementary school, I served as a robotics coach and did a lot of things with STEM and STEAM. And so that also is a lens that I wear and bring to my work, thinking about an engineering process or the scientific mind and how we approach problems and products and just everyday work. Next to that is a picture of me aboard what's called the Weightless Wonder. It's actually a specialized airplane that they have at Johnson Space Center in Texas, and they use it to train astronauts to prepare for them to go outer space or upon the International Space Station. So it was a specialized teacher development, professional development that I had a chance to participate in with students from Arizona and from Georgia, which was really cool. And I don't know if you all can see this in the back, but at the very back, you'll see a 0.00. So this plane, it does parabolas, it goes up and it goes down. And as it goes up and down, it simulates zero gravity. So we were floating around and things of that nature. So very phenomenal and cool experience. And then the last one to the far left, bottom left, is a picture. That's my astrological sign. I'm a Sagittarius. And so if you know some of the other pictures, the traveling and the inquiry and the wanting to have a better understanding just of how things work, I think that also speaks to who I am today. So this is my identity board. Just wanted to share a little bit with you all, and we'll speak more about identity later on throughout this session.
Okay, so it's my turn, and hopefully this works for you because I'm getting mixed messages. I did pop in a new back channel chat. It's called Yo Teach, and I just put the latest link in. So hopefully it works. If not, we're gonna have to have a plan C. And so we apologize. So really quickly going into my identity slide, and this is what makes Cindy Caldwell the person that I am. This is the first picture, obviously my family. We're pretty loud. We're pretty big personalities. We do weird things like getting dressed up fancy for Christmas, even though it's just us, and we throw tissue paper around. But this is, you know, everything that I am, everything. It's my, you know, sense of purpose every morning. And so that's a big, huge part of my culture. The picture of my daughter rock climbing, this is something we do both like as a family, but I feel I want my daughter to have these experiences where she has to overcome challenges. And one thing I love about rock climbing, it's all about strategy. They even call the routes we take problems. That's what they're called. And so it's really just kind of seeing different kinds of routes and how to pick it apart. And it is hard, and we do get hurt and you get bruised knees, and that's just part of, you know, if you want to do this sport, you know, that's just part of the price we pay. And it's kind of like life, go through life, get a couple bruises along the way. The third picture is, well, I'm based in Miami. I grew up in Miami, born and raised. You know, you hear things about Miami, or if it's a party town, and it really very much is in many ways, not in the burbs necessarily, but what I do love about my city is that everybody dances, everybody wants to have a good time. There's parties everywhere, every weekend, whether it's family parties, pool parties. We're spicy. I love it. I like, people will just start dancing in the middle of the store if the right song comes on. And that's what I do love about my city. It's very rich in culture. And so I really have appreciated growing up here. And if you ever do come, you need to go to Ball and Chain. Hopefully the, you know, COVID will be long gone, but this is one of the best places to go, and you can get free salsa lessons while you're there. The fourth is really more of an image. And because of the way I grew up, my mother is from Peru, came here in her mid-20s, married a nice Polish boy from Pittsburgh. But at the time when she came over, it was very much about assimilation. There is no hyphenation in your nationality. She actually, I mean, she assimilated so well. To this day, she still refuses to hyphenate who she is. She's not a Peruvian American, she's an American. This was a huge struggle and issue for me growing up, you know, not really understanding, because the way I grew up was very much the way that she was raised. culturally, even just the norms of what we did as a family or being a female. And my role as being a female was the expectation is you're going to get married and be a mother. And she used to make me say, come watch me cook. And I would say, why? She's like, because if you don't know how to cook, your husband's going to leave you. My response at the time was, I wish he would. Let him go, fine, but this is very much, the culture that I was raised in. So when I did my grad work, I did a lot of work around this because I didn't understand why she wasn't proud of where she came from. She still doesn't like to talk about it. And so I think there's also like so many things like trauma of just being in the country where women were not, seen as equals to men. She also was escaping socialism. So there's a lot of stuff I've had to unpack as I've grown up, and trying to do that without my mom didn't want to talk about it. Who do I talk to? Cousins, aunts. So a lot of it's hearing from other folks. Then you see the picture of, this was me as a first year teacher, guys. Look at how young I was and naive and my shiny eyes. I mean, like, I was so excited. I was like, pinch me. And it was a tough year. I cried every single day. I can tell you all about it. And that actually pushed me into my work when I was working in Miami-Dade County Public Schools as an executive director in our PD department, because I oversaw our new teacher program. And I really felt strongly about supporting new teachers and ensuring that they didn't cry every day like I did, because I wanted to do the best that I could. And I just felt like I wasn't. So in my first year, I really was adopted by this group of teachers who were quite the veterans. We're still friends. We've lost a few. Miss Reed has passed away, and Miss Lockett was my mentor, and she's the one that's on my left of Mr. Morales in the center. And it was one of the hardest experiences of my life. I taught in a school that was nothing like the schools that I went to, and it was only 10 miles away from where I grew up. So I learned a lot. It propelled me to go into getting my master's degree in urban education. And there is where I befriended even more folks who grew up very differently from me. They grew up in Liberty City and Allapattah, and I'm sure you're familiar with Allapattah from Moonlight, who kind of gave me, they kind of coached me around, like, this is what you can do. This is how you can understand. And again, like, still friends. A lot of them are ed leaders today. And so being a teacher is very much part of my DNA. I always try to teach whenever I can. And I never had the fever to be a principal or a school leader. And that was just my thing. It still is. The next picture is a picture of my family's home in Peru. I spent time there. My mother took me there for quite a while, to the point where I think I forgot my English. And I came back and didn't know how to speak English. So when I was there, it's a farm in the mountains. It's very remote. I got to really know my grandfather. My grandfather is a Quechua descendant. And so I understood a lot about the way that there was a very clear line in class and the way people were seen and the way people were treated, depending on what they looked like and also what their background was. And I could talk about that for a long time, but there was a huge difference that I noticed. But I loved it. I loved my experience there. I really got to get like old school farm life, milking cows with our bare hands. Guinea pig is a big staple food out there. So I ate my fair share of cuy, which I didn't know at the time was a guinea pig, but this is what you find out. But it is delicious, I will say. The next one is an image of the brain. And I think some of you had a chance to look at the modules, or at least get a sense of what we're going to be learning about. We do talk about not only brain compatible strategies, but we will be addressing the neuroscience of the brain. We'll be looking at things like trauma, looking at neuromyths, but even approaches for, dysregulation. And so a personal story is my own experience because of a traumatic event, a medically traumatic event where I almost lost my life. Took about a month for them to diagnose me with PTSD. I guess the blessings or the gifts that come out of those horrible experiences are, at the time, I really understood why people have substance abuse issues. And I understood why people want it, they commit suicide. Your brain is in such a different place, and you can even see it by looking at it, that it physically looks different. It shows that there is something going on. And so from that experience, I spent all of my time afterwards wanting to understand more about the brain, because I started to understand the students, I started to understand the teachers and some of the folks that I was working with. And it's completely given me a different lens on how I view, everyone, myself, my friends, people I just meet. And so that was my lead into this work. And then last but not least, if you know me, I love ed tech. I really see it as a way for all of our students to have access. I will be happy to, I'm always offering what I call my appy hours, which are my tech sessions on free apps that you can use for classroom. They've come in handy because of distance learning. So and that's just my thing. I just do that on my own because I love it. But I really do see it as a way that we need to think about, not only because of COVID, even prior to COVID, but even more so now, because I think COVID has really just shown the inequities when it comes to access to digital, not only digital devices, but to information that's available on the internet. And that's me in a nutshell. And we will be asking you all to create your own identity slides as part of one of our home learning environments. This is a great way to introduce ourselves, not only as professional developers or in our TA work, but more importantly, teachers, and how they can have students do their own identity slides and get a sense of everybody that's in the room and all of the value and gifts that they bring to the classroom.
Thank you, Cindy. Something that I wanted to circle back to is the opening activity. So the opening activity, the focus of it was to build community in this space. And so this is a great activity that teachers can implement or facilitators can implement to build community initially. And what were some of the responses, or what, I'm curious as to what did you all, how could you all see this activity being used maybe in other ways in your role? If you wouldn't mind putting that in the back channel, that'll be helpful.
It looks like some folks were able to get in, so that's somewhat good news.
So can I ask a clarification question, Bijane?
Mm-hmm.
Are you asking us to respond to the opening slide activity where you wanted us to put this one, not the ones that you guys just reviewed?
Right, this one, this
Okay.
activity here. Yes, thank you, Catherine,
Okay.
for that clarifying question. So I'm just curious as to how else could this type of activity could be used. It was a little foiled because of the chat box issue. I was going to ask other things about what interested you in learning. What did you learn from other people about them sharing their name? And also, how are names significant in each other's identity? For example, my name is Bijane. It's actually a Persian name. And so I quite often people have difficulty pronouncing and saying the name, but I think but names are very key and significant to individuals' identities, to each identity. So the question is just, how could you use this activity in your current role? Just shorten up the activity pretty much. If you could put that in the back channel, that would be great. And then we'll move on.
Share some of what everyone's been sharing. I've got like, thanks to the two of you for sharing. A great way to see each other's humanity right away and to feel connected. It's a good activity to introduce oneself in any engagement. I agree. And I got to tell you, I learned this on Twitter's wonderful. And I was watching what teachers were doing and sharing on Twitter before the opening of schools. And so, good teachers borrow good ideas from each other. So I thought this is a fabulous way for us to get to know each other. And it's so much more, you get a deeper sense of, like, for those of us that do staff development, it's a much nicer way to introduce ourselves. But more importantly, when we do roll this out to schools, to principals, we're hoping these are just kind of ideas that they can take back with them.
All right, so we're gonna move forward. So in every great idea for training and professional learning, it has to be based off of a need, right? So what are the needs and what is the rationale for the work? And Cindy, would you share a little bit about the rationale for why we developed this particular set of trainings?
Sure. And so in addition to, like, our own personal rationales for coming, to this work. Also, what might bring you here to this room. Just looking at what some of the experts have shared. It's of course, what we find in some of the work that we do, not only with monitoring, is, and we'll be honest, you hear and you see schools, principals, teachers that say they are doing cultural responsive teaching. And really what we're finding is it's really more something that they just checked off. It was a one-dayer. They did a nice little training. My district is guilty of the same thing. And they just assume that by having what we call like that shallow culture, and think about our own experiences growing up. How is culture incorporated into your classroom as a student? And my experiences with the international food festivals, or you dress up, or you have like a week or a day where you celebrate a culture or a heritage. And really, again, that's really just more at that much more shallow level. And so we really leaned on the work of like Gloria Ladsworth-Billings, Linda Darling-Hammond. Personally, I have used what I call the brain compatible teaching strategies that was, I don't want to say developed, but Dr. Marcia Tate, and you might be familiar with her shouting won't grow dendrites and her worksheets won't grow dendrites, as we have here. And I really loved the bringing together of the two. And when Bijane and I were looking at this work, of course, we also looked at what Zarita Hammond has done in her work with CRT and the brain tie-in. So these are just a few of the rationales from the experts, among the range of other experts, about what brings us all to this work. Oh, so this is me too. Okay, so this is just kind of an overview of what to expect over the 3 modules. We're not going to be covering brain compatible right away here in module 1. We're looking at that's going to be more module 2, where we go into the dendrites and the neurons and the synapses and the neurotransmitters and all that good fun stuff. And we really get to know about our brains. And it really is the beautiful mind. And more importantly, we want teachers to understand, because a lot of the approaches that we see are that people come in it like they're trying to fix the minds and the brains of students, and it's not. We have to look within ourselves first. So we are going to look at what culturally responsive teaching is and really define it as a group. We're going to dive deeper into brain compatible strategies, also known as brain-based learning, and tap into how the brain processes, understands, filters, stores, and recalls information. And every brain is different. And so really it's just finding those ways that we learn best, and thinking about how that might be applicable to every one of the students in our classrooms. And sorry, I keep approaching it like a teacher, and I probably will. So my teacher hat is on, so I will say our classrooms. I just ask you to indulge me in that. And then we're going to really look at some of these techniques and strategies for culturally responsive instructional strategies to engage all students to create these safe and supportive learning environments, and bringing all of the 3 modules together, and thinking through how to continue and sustain that work beyond like our 3 modules, through PLCs, through could be lesson studies or other job embedded professional learning process. That's the overview. Oops, sorry.
Okay, all right. So in setting the stage for any environment, and especially for doing this work, one of the critical pieces is to set agreement. So we no longer use the word norms, but we use the word agreements, because we all want to agree on how we will show up for this work. And so what we have here is a sampling of agreements. I'm going to transition into our Padlet wall.
Yeah, I just popped the link to the Padlet. And we've all had to think about translating a lot of our in-person activities into virtual settings. And so this was one way that we found to be, if we, in its pure form, we would have spent the 45 minutes developing these together, but for the sake of time, we were trying to think of a much quicker way. So what we've done is we've populated a lot of like the more traditional, or what we've been hearing and trying to ask for folks to incorporate in our agreements. So if you click the link in the chat, it'll take you to our Padlet, and go ahead and I'll let Bijane walk you through it. Sorry, doing the
no problem. So if you look at the top, it has the direction. So pretty much We're going to give you a few minutes to read each agreement and click on the heart icon here next to the top 3 that you feel are essential for this process. So while there are many, and we probably could use all of them, we definitely want to highlight the top 3. And then what we'll do is, based on those that seem most popular, we will use these for our next coming modules. And just an FYI, so this is a modification of the NSRF protocol, which we also have here, just in case you all want to access later on or use this. So it's very similar to a classroom. You know, it's the first week of school. You want to set, I think traditionally it was called the rules of the classroom, right? However, you want to set community agreements. And so this is an example and a way to do that virtually. So I'm going to give you all about 3 minutes now to read through each agreement, and just click on the heart and it will tally up those agreements. And so that we can make a decision on which ones will we use moving forward. And again, they're all important, but for this work, we'll select a few. All right, so 3 minutes starting now. Feel free to read each one, and I'll scroll down so you all can see the others. And just let us know if you have an issue with accessing the Padlet. So we have some examples such as be beginning and on time, be open to reflective silences, take responsibility for your own learning, listen for understanding, express yourself, and don't fear about stumbling over your words. If you wonder, ask. Share airtime equitably.
We'd also invite you, if there's one that you feel like is really missing, feel free to click there might be I think it's a pink plus sign and add. And if there's no pink plus sign, then we can go ahead and go through the YoTeach back channel.
Okay, so we have a couple voted on. And this may not take 3 whole minutes, but we'll give you a little bit more time.
See a lot of question assumptions.
Mm.
4 votes. Be open to reflective silence.
Be patient.
And yes.
We have a new one added, speak your truth respectfully.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, so we'll allow for about 30 more seconds. And usually for this activity, usually we end up with anywhere between 5 to 7 agreements, even 5 to 9. But that's a good window of agreements for people to remember. And then you remind them of each time you re-engage and reconnect with the work, or in a space, whether it's virtual or in person. All right, so let's take a look and see what we have here. So far, it looks like we have 6 hearts for be patient. People process in different ways and at different speeds. Excellent. We also have be open to reflective silences. Speak only for yourself. Listen for understanding, and there's even a graphic there that provides the 7 active listening skills. Expect discomfort. Value differences. So great. Okay. All right. And respect one another, as well as let's support each other's learning. All right. All right. So what we'll do is the next time we will implement these. So keep these in mind. And what we'll do is when we meet again for module 2, we'll have them posted just like this. So it'll just be those top ones that people felt were very critical. And we'll revisit this and talk about this again.
And we always, we'll be taking you through an exercise in module 3 where we show you how to develop these, you know, for teachers to use with their students, but also understanding that these are dynamic. These are things that can be adapted. We can add to them, we can reword them, we can clarify. So we also invite that as well, if there's any need for clarification on what folks meant by certain agreements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, part of this process, when you have more time, is to really go through each one and talk about what they look like and what they don't look like. It's also helpful to understand like what it doesn't mean, and as Cindy said, interpret what they mean and explain those interpretations, and even maybe give examples. That's always helpful in group settings, as well as with students as well. I find that helpful as well to really help drive home the point and level set. Make sure we're all on the same page. Okay. All righty, so let's transition back to the slide deck. All right, so if we have any tweeters in the room and you have an aha moment throughout the session, feel free to tweet it, tag Wested, and also you can tag Cindy at Cindy Caldwell and use the hashtag CRT, that stands for Culturally Responsive Teaching. Okay. All right, and then just as a reminder, the CRIS pilot program consists of 3 modules. And so we're in module 1. It'll go for about 2 hours. And this first module is focused on the 3 R's. So we'll unpack what the 3 R's are. The next session will be next Wednesday, same time. It's called The Beautiful Mind, where we'll talk about the brain, how it operates in brain-based learning, and how it relates to culture. And then the 3rd module will be the following Wednesday, and we'll look more at culturally responsive instructional strategies. All right, materials for module 1. So we had the first palette, which was setting the agreements, but we also have another palette for you all to use and access, and it will be there will be resources provided pertaining to the training. And so Cindy will share the link, but it's also here for you. It is tinyurl.com/CRIS tools. I think it's case sensitive, so CRIST or capital and then OOLS. So CRIS tools, that will give you access to the Padlet. This is what it looks like, just in case so you know that you're in the right place. And module 1 is the 3 R's here. We have a note catcher for you. So those of you who like to type and jot down or even write to process the content information, we have a reflective journal for you here, and you can use this throughout the 3 modules. We have the agreements here, and it'll take you there. We will talk about implicit bias throughout this training, as well as warm demander. So these are all the resources for module 1. All right, moving forward. All right, and one thing that we wanted to highlight is that the work for culturally responsive teaching and practices is not a one-stop shop. It's not a silver bullet or a magic pill. It's really deep work that takes place at various levels. And so, as you see here, according to this chart by IDRA, you have different pillars here. So you have the culturally responsive pedagogy, you have culturally responsive educators, culturally responsive leadership, culturally responsive schools. And if you continue to think about these tiers, the next level would be districts, right? Culturally responsive districts, culturally responsive communities, culturally responsive policies. So these tiers continue to go on and on. Again, it's not a one-stop shop, but throughout CRIS, we will cover classroom relationships as well as instructional practices. So this is just a beginning starting point, an anchor point into this work. All right, so here's our quote by the famous Lauryn Hill for this session is, how you gonna win when you ain't right within? So if anybody in the back channel, if you wanna type in, what does that mean to you? What does that say to you? How you gonna win when you ain't right within? What does that mean for you? How do you interpret that message in that statement? This is what this module is about. This is what our focus is on. All right, and Cindy, as those come through, feel free to respond, and I'm going to move on to the next slide. All right, so we're getting started. So we did our prep, our warm up, our setting the groundwork, our community building. Now let's dive into recognize, rewire, and relate. These are the 3 R's of CRIS, culturally responsive instructional strategies. And here are the objectives for this module. So it's to define culture, privilege, implicit bias. Throughout the session, you will evaluate your own personal biases. You will describe practices that are optimal for culturally responsive teaching, or CRT. And then we'll talk about explaining the significance in building trust and alliances with students. So here's a graphic that we created. It was from a colleague of mine, Dr. Stenhouse. She does a lot of work in multicultural ed, as well as work around culturally responsive teaching. And this graphic really embodies what the 3 R's are. So in order for you to even get to the point of having culturally responsive pedagogy or a classroom or instruction, as we said before, you have to start with the self. So this is like the pre-primer level of culturally responsive practice. We have to reconsider how to rewire some of our thinking and some of our learning, recognize with our eyes, as well as be able to relate with our heart to others. So now we're going to jump into recognize. And why is recognizing so important? And recognizing is key to culturally responsive instructional strategies, because we have to recognize the cultural influences and the cultural capital within the classroom. All right, so let's start off with a scenario. So here's a scenario here. It's called, it's fine. So a teacher new to your district joins your 5th grade team. And during back to school orientation, you learn that the new teacher is British and recently moved from England and has taught for several years. She submits her first week of lesson plans as required, and the principal indicates it's fine. However, the new teacher asks you, what can she do to fix the lesson plans because she's in fear of being fired? So if you think about that scenario, how might culture have impacted this conversation? So in the back channel, in the chat, how do you think culture might have impacted this conversation? What do you see going on here? What is happening here? What is happening? Any thoughts? How might culture have impacted this conversation?
So just to share some of the chat box, I see a comment here. It means that you have to do your own work on yourself first. Oh, I'm sorry. This was from the previous one. Fine can mean different things to different people and cultures. Seems like the teacher is used to having her lesson plans closely reviewed by a superior. Tone is also hard to translate across cultures. It's fine might be interpreted differently. In England, it's fine may be a negative comment. Fine, right, okay, sorry.
Excellent, excellent, that's correct. So although this teacher, you imagine, oh, this teacher is British, okay, there should be some similarities among English-speaking countries. It's fine depending on how it's translated and how you hear it or how you read it, means something different. Exactly. It means it's not actually fine. It's actually, in some ways, sarcasm. So that's something to keep in mind. And we want to point out that culture is very critical, is a critical piece to classroom education and relationships. And it can also be very subtle, very subtle. So let's talk about what is culture. So we have some pictures here, some different graphics of culture. Culture means several different things. Tell me, what does culture mean to you? What is culture? In the back channel, what is culture? And I want to go back to some of those comments about What is culture? What is culture? And Cindy, what were some of those other comments about the quote from Lauryn Hill? I don't want to miss that opportunity to talk about
Oh,
that.
yeah, sure. Oh, one was, it means that you have to do your own work on yourself first to be able to turn outward. Remove the beam from thy own eye before removing the speck from thy neighbor's. Matthew 7:5. Contributed by Matthew, I think. And then it also says, folks said, I have to know myself before I can change myself.
Very powerful. Very powerful.
So I see here a definition. One person's description of culture is that they think of culture as a combination of history, norms, values, identities, and perspectives that are shared by to some degree by a group of people. Another response, culture is your shared history and ways of doing things that people in the group take for granted. A separate response, the holistic influences and experiences that affect a person's identity. And another one, culture, your way of doing things that influence the way to see and understand the world, language, food, religion, gender. And I love this, on the most intimate level, culture is one's personal footprint. I love that.
Those are great definitions. And they also connect too with the quote from Lauryn Hill, right? So taking a look at the macro to the micro level and where culture shows up and how we see ourselves and how we identify with others. And so for just as a working definition, we're going to say culture is a set of beliefs and behaviors that are learned and shared by a group. Okay, so just for all those definitions that you provided are accurate, before just a working definition for this training, we want to say it's a set of beliefs and behaviors that are learned and shared. And where does culture show up? So here's some examples of places of where culture can show up, right? You can have a national culture. So if you think about the United States of America, you know, there is definitely how we are perceived to have a certain culture as what culture that we exude. There's regional culture. For example, if you're thinking about the Southeast or the Southwest or the New England states, there's culture there. There's local culture within, either it could be within your state, it could be within your city, it could be within your town. There's also culture that shows up ethnically or linguistically or within your family. There's corporate culture, we've heard of that, or organizational culture, like WestEd has a culture. And there's also classroom culture that you can also build. There's other examples of ways of where culture show up. In the chat box, feel free to add, where are some other places that culture shows up? So again, from that macro level to the micro level, culture shows up in a ton of different places. And sometimes it's so subtle, sometimes it's hard to identify and recognize and differentiate. Okay. So thinking about culture, in what ways is an oak tree like culture? What ways is an oak tree like culture? What ways is culture like an oak tree? How could those two be connected? Okay, I see it gives people a sense of place, like the roots. Culture has its own roots. Great. Its roots go deep within a group. Things below the surface inform what is happening above ground. Oh, wow. Wow. All those are exactly right. So this is a graphic that we have used, used from Zaretta Hammond's Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. And it's called the culture tree. And similar to what was shared in the chat, is that you have these different levels. So we want to look at it at these 3 tiers. So on the top, there's this surface level, as Cindy mentioned, this concrete It's observable. You know, if you go to a different country, or even if you go to different communities where there's the predominant culture, you can maybe identify by maybe the dress, right? Or the music, or the holidays that they celebrate, or the food, right? And oftentimes this creates a low emotional charge, right? It's like, okay, there's different cultures, not a problem, great. But then if you think about the trunk of the tree, you go a little bit deeper, right? You have what we call this behavioral level. And oftentimes these are the unspoken rules and social norms, such as nonverbal communication, eye contact, personal space, parenting, handling emotions, and even concepts of time. So unpacking that a little bit. So thinking about, there are certain cultures where in business settings, you should look somebody directly in the eye. That's showing a sign of respect. However, in other cultures, that is not okay. It's showing a sign of disrespect. I know where I grew up in St. Louis, it was a predominantly urban community, but in those areas, if you looked at someone in the eye, that means you had a problem and it was time that you were ready to fight. So it was a signal of a confrontation. So although that was an unspoken rule and unspoken social norm, so you didn't go around necessarily making eye contact with somebody unless you were angry and you had a problem. So again, this level is more on the behavior level, and it's harder to define, but as you are immersed in the culture, you understand and you pick up these instances. Just about concepts of time. In some cultures, you have to be on time, you have to be on early, you have to be early. In other places, it's okay. Oh, you know, if you're a couple minutes late, we know we're not going to start on time. That's how we roll, right? And then if you look at the roots, I like how Matthew said in the comments that culture is rooted, is deeply rooted. And these are the things that are even more abstract than these unspoken rules, right? These are the value systems that we have, and we all hold these, right? The core belief systems of how you view the world, you know, spirituality, fairness, what is considered fair, concepts of yourself, decision-making, how should that happen? Thinking about cultural archetypes. And these things, the lower that you go on a tree, they tend to provide more of an emotional charge and an emotional trigger. Cindy, did you want to add anything about the culture tree?
Yeah, just, you know, I think it's interesting, even as you're talking about with like eye contact, what that means in different cultures. Here we have a large Haitian population, and as educators, one of the things that we were taught in our teacher prep programs here locally was about it is considered disrespectful for you to look an elder in the eye. So when you're asking a child to look you in the eye when you're speaking to them, understand, depending on their culture, they're being respectful. And by not looking at you, they're being respectful. But what is the cultural norm of the dominant culture here? It's like, you're supposed to look me in the eye because that's a sign of respect if you don't. It's a sign of respect if you do. So just all sorts of like, even just memories come up, and I don't know if you all are feeling it, but you're probably pulling up perhaps some personal experiences as you're looking at these different levels of the culture tree, and understanding that even in like right now, there's a lot of emotions. And so I, not only like just worldwide, but even just politically, there are some intense emotional charges going on. So what are we like tapping? What's being triggered and where in this area of culture to affect these feelings, to affect the way our behaviors? So that was just my little add-in.
Mm-hmm. And the thing that's powerful about culture is we all have culture, right? And culture shows up in a variety of different places, from the macro to the micro level. But what's problematic is when we're working with school systems and in school systems, oftentimes there's a dominant culture that's enforced. And if that norm or value system is not followed, students are penalized. That's where the problem and the issue comes in. So I'm curious in the chat box if you all could share how do schools reinforce maybe dominant cultures? If you think about that, how do schools reinforce dominant cultures? It's okay to have your cultures. I think a lot of time to have culture, because we all have it. But I think the problem comes in is when we feel like one is right over the other, and then we penalize and punish students for not following, just like the example that Cindy said. Okay, so I'm seeing some come through the chat. English only, holidays celebrated or not celebrated, very good. Often they hire people like themselves. That's right, absolutely. Sitting still and being quiet, that's correct, absolutely. Teachers make assumptions about what students' behavior mean. That's a very powerful one and happens way too often. Who and what is valued in schools, that's right. And that not only happens in schools, but you can see that in workplaces as well, right? So this is where this work is so important and critical, because again, we all have culture and it shows up in a variety of different ways, but when we tend to penalize and punish, that's where it's problematic and we're not serving all students. Also, modes of instruction, that's a huge one. Modes of instruction is a huge one because it's providing a deficit to others who do not learn in specific styles. I know for me, I am definitely a visual and a kinesthetic learner. So seeing something with a whole bunch of text on there or listen to a long text or whatever it may be, that is not my learning style. And it's not that I'm not capable of learning, but that is not my learning style. Those are great additions and things that we have to be mindful of and fight against. All right, so taking to the next slide, we want to circle back to identity. So we led you up, we talked about culture, we unpacked it, we talked about what it is, we have a working definition, where it shows up, we broke down the culture tree. We also want to talk about how privilege and identity also show up in schools. So across the nation, children from all backgrounds are experiencing a time in which discussion about whether it's race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, culture are at the forefront of everyday lives, right? And oftentimes these conversations are avoided, right? Because they're just fear of discomfort or guilt or anger or sadness or even lack of awareness, right? And so while many people may not view themselves as privileged, maybe because of their social economic status or their social status, we all have some sort of privilege that is attached to our identity. So we talked a little bit earlier about some of our identities on our identity board, but we want to highlight here that privilege is a special advantage or entitlement used to one's benefit or to one's detriment. So for example, I can share a personal example. So for me, I'm an African-American woman, right? So that's part of my identity. I also have 3 degrees. So I'm talking about my education. And so those having 3 degrees affords me certain opportunities that maybe others may not have if they do not have a degree. Does that mean they're any less smart? No, absolutely not. But it is an advantage that I have, okay? Also political beliefs or family or age, gender expression, all those things provide different advantages. So we have a survey. I want you to think about your identity using this identity wheel and think what gives you an advantage. And with that advantage and that privilege also comes power.
So the link is in the Zoom chat, and if you're having trouble accessing it, I can give you the long link, but it's a tiny URL.
So this is what the survey looks like. And while there may be many pieces of the identity wheel that you identify with and that may provide you with privilege, I want you maybe just select your top five for time's sake. So all those categories that were on the identity wheel, you'll see here as well. So just click on your top 5 and then click submit. And then what we'll do is we will take a look at the results as they come in. So let's take about 30 seconds. And what do you think your top 5 privileges are based on your identity that gives you access, that gives you an advantage, and ultimately gives you power? Top 5. And this is anonymous, so it has no one's name on here. Okay, so we see the results coming in. So it looks like education. Education is a big one, right? Income, absolutely. We have ethnicity. National origin, yes, plenty of privilege being an American, right? Language and communication skills, yes. That's a powerful one too, and can also be a barrier. So far, it seems like from this particular group, it seems like the top are ethnicity, that gives you privilege, education, language and your communication skills, income, as well as these tend to be a close 5th. These are ties. So national origin, your sexual orientation, as well as your mental or your physical ability. So think about the power that you may have and the advantage that you may have having those identities associated with you. And if you have students in your classroom who don't have those, how does that impact the learning environment? Are they penalized and punished for that when we're supposed to be in the service of all students, regardless of their ethnicity, their age, their sexual orientation, their education, their communication skills, their income? Think about that. If you've downloaded the reflective journal, that would be a good place to record that, to process this content. And another piece that I want to note, so while we know that our identity can give us privilege and advantage, it's not to make you feel bad in a particular way. It's just one to recognize, right? So thinking about that graphic is to recognize the advantages that we had, but then also to note that these same privileges continue to be perpetuated systematically by intentional policies and procedures and practices. And again, that's where it becomes problematic for students to learn and achieve and to thrive in today's schools. All right, Cindy, take us to the next activity. Or did you want to take a quick break or do you want to keep going? You're on mute.
Sorry, my favorite 320 phrase. So I'm going to go ahead and do this really quick. I wanted to invite everybody to either on a scratch sheet of paper or your note catcher, something that you can jot down really quickly. We're going to kind of flash some phrases at you about different kinds of folks. And as these statements come up, we want you to just kind of be aware of like what is happening. What is your brain doing? How are you feeling? Either jot down that feeling when you come across these certain phrases, jot down the first thing that comes to mind. Obviously, this is on your own sheet of paper, not that we'll all see it, but we want this to be like authentic and just really how you feel. So I think we're ready to go. We're gonna kind of, I'm gonna just read them out, and as Bijane like clicks the next transition. And again, just take a moment to jot down how you feel about these statements or what feelings are being triggered, and just pay attention to your mind. See if something's going on up there. Okay, go for it. How do you feel about people who like classical music, like country music, like rap music, don't attend church, Attend church regularly. Don't eat meat. Don't believe in marriage. Drive an electric car. Didn't go to college. Don't speak English. Curse. Love cats. Own a gun. Play sports. Drive a truck. So I'm gonna probably break protocol, and I know we didn't want folks to take the microphone, but I did want to hear from anybody, like, what were you feeling during the exercise, or did you notice anything going on, upstairs? What was happening? What were you feeling? And there's really no right or wrong answer. I just wanted to kind of get a sense of the folks in the room, like, what were you feeling? What tensions did you feel? What was showing up for you? Feel free to take the mic.
This is Matthew. I'll just share. So not knowing, not knowing what the prompts were, I've had like a metacognitive awareness of like worrying about what they would be and what my mind's unfiltered private reaction would be, even knowing that it's just like an unfiltered private reaction that like only I'm going to see. But so there was that like sort of like meta awareness, I'll say.
Yeah, I'm writing that down. Great.
Hi, this is Mari. I'm just going to say that I felt a little bit of tension in my mind when I was thinking about each of these characteristics, because something would initially pop into my mind, like a one word or something, and then I would think about all of the outliers or exemplars that did not fit within that one word. That was my immediate reaction.
Thank you. That's really helpful to hear. It's so interesting. Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in? So I remember when this was happening with me, just to share my own personal experience, I literally, in some cases, pictured people I knew. And so that triggered feelings, whether how I felt about that person, people in my family, people that were friends or were no longer friends, people that I've worked with. I think that's where I went. I was thinking just about what I call like my everyday group. And, interesting how certain things triggered certain emotions. Owning a gun, being very honest, triggered me. We don't have guns in our house. I'm personally like, I don't even have a water gun for my kid. I don't like them, and I get really triggered by them. So that's where I went. I just thought about people I knew and their faces would flash. Oh, I love it. Someone else said that one triggered me too. Yes, right? Yes.
And to share, Cindy, I actually am a gun owner. I'm single. I live by myself. I own a gun. So there we go. For personal safety.
Yeah.
This is Kate, and I guess because I come from the UK, big no-nos on guns. So, here's that culture popping up again.
And I'm sure there's some statements that are not here. And just to be, like one thing, and I'll be very honest, that has recently triggered me, which I'm surprised by, is seeing, we had a new neighbor move in and they stuck a big old American flag in front of their house. And I'm going to be honest with you, I felt a little triggered, and I don't know why, but these are new. That's new for me. So these are just some of the things that are happening, and your brain is basically it's trying to do its job, right? It's just, it's trying to categorize because your brain is trying to keep you safe. I didn't know if anybody had anything else to share, because I'll go into kind of what was happening here, or at least what your brain was doing. Any other thoughts? Or
this is Dahlia. I found myself thinking a lot of, or wondering about context. For example, the one about own a gun, my immediate reaction was sort of negative, but I live in a neighborhood where we have a lot of military families who I know own pretty heavy machinery and keep it in their house. And they're people I trust and I actually feel safe because they're around me. We don't have a gun in my house, so it's kind of nice that I know who does if I need help. So I felt like context matters a lot.
It does. Thank you, Talia. That's so helpful. Yeah, really interesting exercise. And I only do these things because of what happened with me. And I'm like, if this made me feel a certain way, I'm hoping it'll have that same reaction with other folks. And again, it's just really interesting to be aware. It's that metacognitive process of like thinking about our own thinking, like, why did my mind just go there? And you're right, like Dahlia, where do you go first? And then when you start to kind of think about, let's think context. Well, I do know a lot of people, like military families that have guns, and my sister owns a gun. She, she is what these self-sustaining, what do you call it, hunters, where she eats and uses every part of the animal. She used to be a vegetarian, by the way. So like, I think about her, I'm like, I know what she's doing. I know what she's using it for. And so it kind of softens that feeling, but it takes a little time. So if we could go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about what's happening. And I think a lot of you probably already know, it's, goes back to the good old, amygdala.
Did you want to take a quick break, Cindy, or
yeah. Did you all, I think maybe we'll do a break then? Yeah, let's do that. Sorry.
Yeah, did you all want to take a quick 5-minute break? Just tech check, bathroom break, if you all need to. Would that be helpful? All right, so we'll do a quick 5 minutes and then we'll come back and we'll move into bias.
I'll go ahead. Disclaimer. So welcome back, everybody. And hopefully you had a chance to take care of some things. I know I grabbed a snack, which was nice. So just to kind of recap what we're coming back to before we left, we had gone over some of those, how do you feel about people who, and so what was going on during that time? And so this leads into our implicit bias section, but when we are making, our brain is processing huge amounts of information in very short spurts of time. And that goes back to the amygdala, which we're going to cover a lot in module 2. But really what your brain is trying to do is keep you alive. It doesn't understand, exactly, it just sees it as a threat. Anything that's either a threat or, something that's actually pleasant, it's one or the other. And so when you were feeling like those, whatever was triggering those, I guess that discomfort or this unfamiliarity goes back to bias. And essentially there are two terms that we use. And when we talked about culture, Bijane had mentioned, your group, this group. And so with bias, there's an out group and then there's an in group. And I think you can probably already get a sense of what that means. In group meaning the folks that you identify as being part of, and what does your in group look like? And then your out group would be the folks that are, the people that are comprised of folks that you don't know, that you do not identify as being part of. And so in these very short amount of time, when you're hearing these different statements, your brain starts reacting. And there are 3 processes when it comes to bias. The first being priming, then it's association, and then you have assumptions. So very quickly, as you're reading the statements, your brain was being primed. And then what was happening as a result is that you were starting to make these associations. And it's really important to be aware of is how have you been primed to make harmful associations about different categories of people. And that's usually as a result of messaging, policies, practices that have been applied throughout history that include or exclude different groups of people. Culture has a huge role in those biases and the way we grew up and where we grew up and how we grew up. And so really there is just so much going on in that very short amount of time that your brain starts to react. And so as it says here, it's like the more information that we're exposed to, whether it's unfair and accurate, the more and stronger those deeply ingrained our biases become. We start building those negative neural pathways for those biases. And anyway, sorry, that was covering that. I'm gonna move on to the next slide. Sorry. There we go. So we're gonna just show a really quick video that we found really helpful and nice and quick piece on implicit bias. So I'm gonna have Bijane share her screen and play her video.
Implicit bias.
Implicit bias.
Implicit bias.
2016 was the year that implicit bias went somewhat mainstream.
Yeah, so when Hillary Clinton mentioned implicit bias in the debates, our phones started blowing up, all our friends started emailing us about it.
But what is implicit bias? Implicit biases are basically thought processes that happen without you even knowing it. Little mental shortcuts that hold judgments you might not agree with. And sometimes those shortcuts are based on race. First, some clarity. Saying someone has an implicit bias is different from calling someone a racist.
The word racist is a highly loaded term, right, here in American society. A lot of times, when people are using it, they're thinking of the kind of old-fashioned Ku Klux Klan style racist.
But implicit bias isn't anywhere near that, explicit.
Implicit bias is something that comes out of ordinary mental functioning, out of how the mind normally works.
We've all grown up in a culture with media images, news images, conversations we heard at home, our education. Think of that as a fog we've been breathing our whole life. We never even realized it, what we were taking in.
And that fog causes associations that lead to biases.
I somehow know that if you say peanut butter, I'm going to say jelly. That's an association that's been ingrained in me because throughout my life, peanut butter and jelly are together. And in many forms of media, there's an overrepresentation of Black men and violent crime being paired together.
And because of that, I actually deep down inside have been taught that Black men are violent and aggressive and not to be trusted, that they're criminals, that they're thugs.
with all those associations, I'm not trying to let us off the hook, but in some ways, none of us stood a chance.
Starting today, we'll post a video a day dealing with one challenge of understanding implicit bias and its relationship to race, and exploring ways we might combat the problem. One more thing, if you're seeing this and thinking that it doesn't apply to you, well, you might be falling prey to the blind spot bias. That's a scientific name for a mental bias that allows you to see biases in others, but not in yourself. We're biased.
Thanks. So we're going to share another graphic with you, and we always like to use our culture tree. And so this was something that Bijan and I had assembled and put together when we're talking about implicit bias, also known as unconscious bias. So we thought of a tree, and this is the way we described it. Your conscious attitudes or your explicit biases are the things that what everyone can see, your green leaves, if you will. These are the things you want folks to see, that you believe in gender equality, that you believe all children deserve a fair and equitable education. But then your unconscious or your implicit biases, which are underneath the ground, that you sometimes don't even know that you're aware of, or what's happening, because they're just so deep, and these attitudes, this is where the actions come out. And so this is, again, going back to the stereotype. And so one example I always like to use when we talk about conscious and unconscious in education is, I could be a school leader, principal of a school, and I have our school mission statement and our vision, and it's, I believe every child can learn. I believe all children deserve a world-class education. But then if you look at my ODR data, then you see that I have probably one of the highest and most disproportionately amount of Black boys that are suspended or expelled in the entire district, right? So what's happening there? So consciously, I believe in my principles as a school leader, and those are the green leaves that everybody sees. That's the thing that I put out there for the world. But unconsciously, my behaviors are not consistent with my conscious. So these are the things that we're not aware of, and this is where it starts to get. This is where we can do great harm. And so, sorry, next slide, please. And again, this is just kind of reiterating what I just said. So, implicit bias operates at the unconscious level. This is the actual behaviors that come out, right? We always talk about changing minds, changing hearts when it comes to implicit bias. And what the research, or a small amount of little research, has been done to show like the impact of implicit bias training. And what we're finding is, really good implicit bias training does change minds, but it does not change behaviors necessarily. And that's what's going on at that unconscious level. And again, going back to what you were feeling when you were looking at the people who these unconscious implicit bias moments are being triggered by rapid and automatic mental associations. And so, what are the repercussions of that? What are the implications? And I think like we know it, we hear it, but in the world, in our world in education, what does that mean? How is that doing great harm in the work that we do? So, sorry, next slide. So, some of the things that we're going to talk about for this half of our module is reflecting on our own cultural lens. And some of you may be familiar with this. The 50-state survey, I think New America put out the publication and looked at those 8 competencies. And so we will be reflecting on our own life experiences and membership in various social groups. We're going to actively work to develop our own cultural competency and become consciously explore self-awareness. Next slide. And I think we had our break, right? Do we keep moving? Okay. So that's going to direct us into our rewiring the brain. And this is a conversation Bijan and I have often. We always hear it from the approach of, we got to fix the kids, we got to teach them empathy, we got to teach them the brain compatible strategies, and we got to rewire their brains. But the reality is, we gotta, like, as educators, we have to rewire our own brains. The kids are great, the kids are good. It's us that really needs to think about fixing ourselves first. And it's those adults that are in front of the classroom. And then it's also those adults that are the leaders of the school, and the adults that are the leader of the district. And it goes back up even into like state education agencies and policies and government. So anyhow, we just wanted to really quickly talk about how we need to think about addressing bias. So in thinking about our work, we already, the demographics of white teachers compared to the amount of minority students is overwhelmingly clear. 84% of our teachers are white, but that does not reflect the population of students in our school. So there is, there is definitely a huge disparity between minority students and their white teachers. And so when we think about what these educators and their implicit biases can cause harm to our students and may result in different outcomes for our marginalized students, and those teachers might even help them less. So, sorry, next slide. So this just kind of brings me to, we are finding, and I know you've heard the headlines about pre-K being, pre-K students being expelled, which is, how do you expel pre-K students? We've had cases here, not only in Miami and South Florida, but we have 7 and 8-year-olds getting arrested. We have them getting Baker acted. And there was a wonderful story about my own district in NPR about the way that we were manipulating the way we were coding students as far as not having them get arrested, but them being Baker acted, even though they really didn't need to be Baker acted. I mean, this is happening even in, like, I'm in the 4th largest urban school district in the United States. So what I wanted to kind of address here, this was something that was done, it was a study done out of Yale. And this is about the pre-K and the expulsion piece. They had taken 135 preschool teachers, and they had directed those teachers that they were going to go ahead and watch a video, and it was going to be footage of 4 kids playing. There was a black boy, there was a white boy, a black girl, and a white boy. A black boy, a white boy, a black girl, and a white girl. They told the teachers that they had to watch the video and that they needed to look for challenging behaviors. And as soon as that they saw something that could be seen or their perception of challenging, they had to hit like the enter key on the keyboard. And so what they didn't tell the preschool teachers is that there were no challenging behaviors. They should not have seen any. In the same regard, they were measuring they were eye scanning the teachers to see what their tracking was as far as who they were watching and for how long and the amount of time. So with the technology, they found that the child that the teachers were looking at the most, and these were teachers that were both Black and white alike, that they spent most of the time watching the black boy, waiting for the bad behavior that never came. And so this is a concern. And so what do we need to think of as far as what we do with our educators? And we know that children start to kind of form these understandings of their world at very young ages. And this is already happening in pre-K programs. I can imagine it's happening in our Head Start programs as well. So I just wanted to kind of pause right there and get anyone's thoughts. And we're going to kind of pause on the chat. We thought it worked really well with the microphone. Did anyone want to jump in and share their own thoughts? Feel free to take the mic. Or feel free to use the chat. So what we're finding is that unconscious biases are affecting the way that teachers educate and discipline our children in early childhood classrooms. We're finding preschool teachers, not only in this case, but they're tending to closely observe more Black students as opposed to white students, especially Black boys, when challenging behaviors are expected. And even regardless of like the family background, there really was no change in the teachers' behaviors. So next slide. So we talked about, implicit bias and where we're at and looking at ourselves. And one thing that we wanted to share, and it's not anything that it still has its flaws, but one tool that we've been hearing a lot about is the Project Implicit tool. And this is something that is where you go in and it mirrors what's called the Stroop test. And if you've ever seen the Stroop test, it's like color words, and then you have to read the color, not the word. So if you go in and you're interested in just kind of seeing where you're at, they have all of these great implicit bias tests, whether it's for gender, for race. I do invite you to go do the race. We're not going to require you to do it, but I think it might be interesting to see what the results are. And again, these are not perfect. There are some flaws, but it's really looking at the amount of time that you spent to try to answer the question. So it was a really interesting process to go through. And I'm even doing this with some of my other colleagues that are in our educational leadership programs, just to kind of get a sense of where we're at so we can at least like self-examine and then begin the work ahead. And we'll share the link with you. I think it's in the Padlet. So if you're interested, please feel free to go on later and take this test. But we're not going to require that you do it. But if you want to talk about it next time we meet, feel free. Sorry, so this is just looking again about shifting mindsets. So the brain, is malleable. We gotta, again, look within in order to rewire the way that we think, in order to relate, in order to recognize, but begin those relationships and ensuring that we start the process to building those culturally responsive classrooms and really leveraging the cultural capital that our students of color bring to those classrooms and those environments. Again, and then I'm not going to read these to you, but going back to the cultural competencies tool, just thinking about when we strengthen our practice, how to recognize and redress bias in our system. And these are just some of the other pieces that we're going to cover in the next couple modules, but also, thinking through as we start to kind of build our own classroom environments to assure that we minimize bias in our classrooms in our schools. Sorry, next slide.
Thank you, Cindy. So far we've gone through the recognize and the rewire portions. And so that leads us into our relate section where relationships precede learning. And it starts with our next activity. I'm going to talk about this. So if everybody would close your eyes and think of your favorite teacher. It could have been a K through 12 teacher, maybe daycare teacher. It could have been someone in college, maybe. Who was your favorite teacher? Think about them. Why were they your favorite teacher? What characteristics did they have? In the chat box, I'm curious as to what made them your favorite. What about them? Give everybody a few seconds to start typing. And then I'll share. Or if we have those who like to share a few things on the mic, feel free to do that. So let's use the Yo Teach app. Or someone can share on the mic. Who was your favorite teacher and why? Cindy, do you mind putting the Yo Teach app in the chat again?
Yeah, it's back in the chat again.
Okay, great. All right, so we have one participant who mentioned their favorite teacher was nurturing and supportive. Great characteristics. Any other characteristics? Favorite teacher was very knowledgeable about what he taught, did not believe in being strict, engaged with his students more like peers and less of subordinates. Okay. Okay, we also have somebody who had a primary teacher was their favorite. He said nice things about that person's writing, a story about being a racehorse. Oh, okay. Somebody else's favorite teacher was inquisitive and asked them personal questions or a lot of questions, and they were also flexible. Someone else's favorite teacher got to know them as a person. Someone else said all their favorite teachers pushed them and called them out in a supportive and critical way, connected before they corrected. And what you all are describing is actually culturally responsive practices, right? So the relationships precede the learning. Before you can get somebody to do something, you have to understand them. You have to understand them and get to know them. And so we're going to talk about a couple of ways to be able to do that. Thank you all for sharing that in the chat, in the back chat channel. So here's some examples of trust generators. There's a couple here taken from Zaretta Hammond's work on culturally responsive teaching in the brain. So one is, as you all mentioned in the chat, is affirmation and validation, right? Being able to acknowledge someone's personhood or talents or abilities, as well as social inequities as well. So not only understanding and giving someone praise, so to speak, but also recognizing, like, you know, what privileges that some students do not have, right? So an example of this would be appreciate students' cultural capital and call out injustices that impact that student. So that's a way to build trust. Another one is selective vulnerability. So being able to share a vulnerable moment, just like Cindy and I did. We talked about our identity boards. We also talked about, you know, us growing up. Those are examples about of trust generators. Also, given the context of your students, you want to be mindful of what you are sharing. I want to say that caveat, but sharing a vulnerable moment is key. Familiarity is another one. So being seen often in particular settings. So for example, for several years, I lived in the community that I taught in. So seeing kids, you know, at the playground at one of their games, you know, or at the grocery store, creates this familiarity and also builds trust, being able to see them in a particular setting. Having similar interests, so talking about your interests as an educator. So sports, for example, or hobbies or causes or television programs. I know I'm a junkie for reality shows, so I can collaborate with my colleagues and my friends on certain shows. Or when I was a teacher, I kept up with some more of the popular cartoons, so I could have something that I could relate to the kids on. Concern is also a trust generator, showing concern for issues that are important to others. For example, if say a pet in a student's life passes, or they have a new sibling that was born recently, being able to remember those details is also a key way to build trust with others. And then competence. I think someone mentioned that in a chat box as well about an art history teacher, being knowledgeable about your content area, but not also being knowledgeable, but approachable and willing to help others to learn that content as well. So implementing engaging and effective learning strategies are great ways to build trust and generators with students and just people in general. Which leads us to warm demander, which is what was also described in the chat box, that connecting before correcting. So I have a quick video here just to give an outline of what is warm demander. And warm demander has been around for a while, but it may be a new term for some. So let's look at a quick little recap.
Have you ever heard of the term warm demanders?
It's a concept that has been used more with teacher-student relationships, but it can also apply to any relationship that leaders have with their teams, parents and their children, coaches, their players. Relationship reboot time. We're finding out what it means to be a warm demander. And joining us now, relationship guru, Michael Walker. Great to have you with us today, Michael.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with the term, because it's been a source of quite a bit of expectation.
I had no idea what it meant. I never heard of it.
Yeah, so it's really based in about how do I show care for the individual and at the same time have high expectations for the individual so that they can be their fullest self and show potential.
And it started in schools?
Yeah, really student to teacher relationships is how it began. So Lisa Del Pitt is one of the people that has talked about it in some of her research articles, yes.
Because we know that there is success when teachers have a warm personal connection to their students. But you still got to get the work done. You
For
still,
sure,
right?
For sure. And it's really based on that. So like, it's how do you build trust? And what we're talking about is how do you build, put money in the bank of relationships. And so that's about getting to know them personally and also professionally so that you have different ideas and things that you know about this student or this employee that you're working with to help them gain better trust in you.
And it's not just about trust, right? It's about encouraging them and believing in them, believing in the impossible and getting them to do so as well.
For sure. And so that's about not believing in single stories, right? That, you know, there's some deficit mindsets that people have about certain students, about certain individuals. And so how do you think past those boxes that people are put in and placed in?
Another way you talk about creating that space is by teaching the idea of self-discipline. And this is the responsibility of the students on that side of the equation?
For sure, but once you have built trust and you built a sense of belief, it's easier for them to have self-discipline because now they can be laser focused and be trusting that you have their best interests at heart.
You got their back.
You got their back, exactly.
And I love this because I'm a huge fan of the phrase, fall forward, fail fast.
Yes.
Because you do need to make mistakes. That's how you learn and get better. But if you can do that quickly, you can get there faster. And that's something that you say, to embrace failure.
Yeah, you have to embrace failure because we're all going to make mistakes no matter what we're doing, especially if we're doing things at work or in school. We're not going to get everything perfect. So how are we having a growth mindset around all these opportunities? And, you know, people that work with me will say I always ask those questions because as a good coach and a leader is you're asking questions to create this space where people can make mistakes, but they can experiment and be risk takers. And so how do you get them to think, so what's the next option or what can we do differently that we didn't do right the first time?
Mistakes are good. It means that you're trying and you'll get there eventually.
All right, a lot of people out there hearing this are thinking, I want to be a warm defender, a warm demander rather. It sounds like something that would be a good thing for most people to find in certain interactions. What do you do? What are some of the actions?
So some of the actions that you can do is basically you have to stand your line, right? So show strength is really meaning about how do I set myself up in a space, because sometimes when we do things differently, the status quo will come up against us and try to do things in the traditional way. And sometimes they tell us in organizations is you can't really get too close to your employees. You got to have this wall and this line. And so you have to say, well, this is going to be for the better good of what the outcomes are for our organization.
But it is a two-way conversation, right? You do have to actually not only give suggestions, but you have to listen.
For sure. Well, that's one of the key components. Anything in a relationship, you have to make sure that you're listening and affirming. So it's not just about
what does that mean?
So yeah, it's not just about the words that people are saying, but also their nonverbals. And so you're listening to the message beneath the message, so to speak, and then affirming what they're talking about and giving them suggestions and ideas about, okay, I hear what you're saying here. How can we make that be actionable in the process that you're trying to create?
And then you have to challenge also.
Well, this is where that relationship piece come into play, right? So we have deposited all that stuff into the relationship bank, and now when we're starting to challenge, we have to get some withdrawals out of that relational bank. And so we have to challenge and then offer choice. So how are we challenging them when they are making those mistakes and when we need them to do better, and then saying, so what's the choices that you have here in front of you?
Not so easy for us passive Minnesotans, but we'll try to work on it. I just like the viewers to know that Jason is my warm defender every day.
Defender and demander.
Yeah, and demander and defender.
All of those things. All of those things. Michael, really good for people to think about. Thanks for bringing this up today.
Thank you for having me.
So in one word in the chat box, what stood out to you in terms of warm demander? What was a highlight as he described it? What was a highlight in one word? Warm demander. Relationship. Authenticity, yes. Appealing, trust. Someone said they love the idea that you can show a deep level of care for somebody and still have high expectations. Trust, excellent. So just imagine if you think about your favorite teacher, and unfortunately we probably can count it on maybe one hand how many favorite teachers you had, but just imagine how powerful it would be if we could have every grade level, a student could encounter their favorite teacher, someone who had warm demander, who cared about them, who validated them, and still had high expectations, not having sympathy in terms of, oh, maybe you can't do this, but no, still had them to connect before you correct. Push them to the next level. How powerful would that be in our country, in our classrooms? All students would be served. All students would be served. Oh, and I like that one too as well, a believer in that person. And that leads us into our next slide. So here, this is a graphic taken from culturally responsive teaching in the brain. And so warm demander has been around for a while. There's several people that reference it. Zaretta Hammond, Gloria Ladson-Billings, Kleinfeld from 1975, she coined the term warm demander. This is a graphic that shows the cross section in between where you should end up as an educator. And they break down different personality types in the classroom. And so you have at the top this active demandingness, you have this personal warmth, this professional distance, as well as this passive leniency, right? And so in the ideal space, in a culturally responsive classroom, warm demander is the key. And so we also have this graphic, because we know it's kind of tiny on the slide, posted on the Padlet wall so that you all can download it or view it in a larger format. And so if you notice, not only do they have warm demander here, which is in the cross section of active demandingness, as well as this personal warmth, they also describe 3 others, which we will talk more in depthly during module 3. So there's the technocrat, the elitist, as well as the sentimentalist, okay? And at different times and places, they may have its place, but again, your ultimate goal here is the warm demander. And I can recall myself being an educator. I would say initially, I'm very much a task-oriented person. As you notice in my identity slide, I had the to-do list, right? Because I'm always thinking like, okay, what's next? What do I have to do? Check off action item, things of that nature. And in the very beginning of my classroom of me teaching, that's how I ran my classroom as well. It was really like, okay, we have to get to this, kind of like a drill sergeant, so to speak, right? So I was operating in a way that was more of a technocrat. And I learned that that people want to know that you care about them. Students want to know that you care about them. And so you have to balance that demandingness with the care and the relationships that you have with others. And that helped me to grow as an educator and even as a professional today. All right, so we talked about the different characteristics, the ultimate idea of creating a culturally responsive classroom, starting with the U and exuding warm demander. We'll highlight some considerations that need to happen in order for you to get there. So one, we talked about the personal warmth. And this is opposed, so this is the opposite end of professional distance, right? There's an intentional focus at the start of the term on positive instructor-student and student-to-student relationships. So not just the instructor to student, but also student to student as well. That's also key in creating that community classroom, positive classroom and culturally responsive community. The active demanding, this is the opposite end of the passive understanding. It occurs only after rapport is established. So remember, we talked about to relate, relationships precede learning. That's where this comes in. The active demanding also pushes back persistently on negative stereotypes. So constantly thinking through your triggers that may come up for you and pushing back on those things, as well as any intrusive demanding is interpreted as care by students, all right? And then the last piece in behaviors of warm demander is affirming effort and ability. Who doesn't want someone to be their own personal cheerleader? Who doesn't want somebody to feel proud of them, especially when you try so hard? Whether you get the trophy or you tried your best and you don't get the trophy. Who doesn't want that personal cheerleaders? That's what, as teachers, that's what we're supposed to be for our students in our classroom. And one way to do that is feedback. So we'll talk more about this in module 3, but feedback phrases like, I know you can do this, or look at what you just did, I believe in you. Those are so powerful and go a long way. And even if a student may not be used to hearing those things, you keep planting those seeds. You keep planting those seeds. Those are very critical and key and important. All right. So we have come to the end of module 1. Thank you for taking your time today. Before you leave, we have a couple of more things that we want to cover and go over. And before we do that, we want to get your feedback on today's session so we know how to revise it and make it even more powerful and concise and meaningful for those who participate. So if you wouldn't mind, could you take this survey? I promise you, it will take you literally 3 minutes. So I'm going to put 3 minutes on the clock, and then we'll finish with the last 3 slides, and we'll make sure that we get you out on time. So go to tinyurl.com/CRIS mod 1. I think Cindy has put that in the chat for you. You click on it, it'll pop right up. Please take that 3-minute survey, and then we'll finish with that last couple slides. So I'll play a little jazz while you all take your survey. Okay, so you all should be close to coming to an end of your survey. And I'm going to just continue on in advance with the slides and be background noise as you all finish up your survey if you haven't already. All right, so thank you again for your feedback. Just a reminder, so we just completed the 3 R's, recognize, rewire, relate. The next module next week, same time, is called The Beautiful Mind, which will go into exploring the brain and how it relates to culture, how it shows up in the classroom for culturally responsive practices. And then our last session will be on the 28th at the same time. This is CRIS, creating the culturally responsive instructional strategy, giving you those culturally responsive instructional strategies. All right, so last but not least, before we leave, and we'll let you out a little early, is homework. So we greatly appreciate if you can. We know everybody's schedule is busy, but when you're joining us next week, we have a quick little task for you to do. It shouldn't take you that long, but on the Padlet wall, and I'll pull that up in a second. Actually, let me pull it up now. So on the Padlet wall here, if you look under module 1 homework, it gives you all the directions and things you need to do. So just select a topic that you would like to learn more about, read or watch that topic, and then identify how you would like to summarize what you've learned. So you don't have to actually summarize the information and produce a product. You just have to think through how you would like to. And so some examples that are relevant to today are creating a TikTok, right? An Insta story, YouTube broadcast, a webcast, an iMovie or a WeVideo, a podcast. Maybe you can record your own webinar or slideshow. And then what are the topics exactly? So I'm going to click here. You can click there, and it'll take us to the topic. So here are the topics. One is a fact sheet about addressing race and trauma in the classroom. Another topic you can choose from is UDL and the learning brain, or you could talk about activating the brain with movement. There's another choice is white fragility in teaching and education, as well as culturally responsive teaching for misconceptions. So for your homework, pick one of these categories, read the article or view the video, and then think of how would you want to communicate and summarize what you've learned. You don't have to do it. We're actually going to spend the time during module 2 next week actually building that product out. So it's best if you come prepared, have already digested the content, and then you'll work together in a small group. Cindy, did you want to add anything?
No, I think really just, pick something, pick your choice. If you wanted to do a podcast, we just wanted to provide you the time so that you could get the whole thing instead of just kind of chunking it and maybe only getting 1 or 2 pieces if we did it as a whole group. So it's helpful, and you're not limited to these products, and you do not have to create them yet. I think it's going to be something you create as a group, but if you're tech savvy, it might be cool to do a TikTok or an Insta story or a Flipgrid, but you're also welcome to do any of the others as well.
And as good teachers do, we provide you with the rubric in advance. So we have here how your digital presentation will be evaluated. So just based on originality, organization and knowledge, and digital media that you use. Again, you do not have to create it before next Wednesday. We'll do this together and have a working session, but it is important for you to select a topic, what group, and then go ahead and read or view that content. Any questions before we leave?
And just to sign up, we'd love to hear your feedback. We want to refine, revise, improve, and so I'm about really like critical feedback. Be a critical friend. We'd love to hear your thoughts, areas for improvement. Please reach out to either one of us, or feel free to put that in the evaluation form.
All right, if there aren't any questions, you all have 2 minutes back.
Great, thank you.
Great job.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. So long.
You on mute.
I was just gonna say, like, we'll have to look at the meeting setting why the chat wasn't working, but
Yeah, that was so weird. I don't know what.
Yeah.
I wonder if because another meeting I went to on the PEP process, it the same way. Like the chat was completely disabled, and I don't know if that was intentional or
I don't know if that's
I don't know if it's something that's West Ed is doing. I don't know. It's really weird.
All right, so we're gonna jump on the other room.
Yeah.
Okay. See you in a minute.
I guess we could have stayed in here, but that's fine. Okay, I'll talk to you later.